Good evening, folks. I say good evening because that's when you're going to see this the first time. Now, who knows when you actually watch this? That's the whole beauty of social media and YouTube and all those things. But it is not morning when I'm recording this. As you can probably see from the clock over my shoulder, it's about 9:15 or so on Tuesday morning. Got a lot of things happening today. Needed to get this recorded and uploaded so it can be there in time for us to be able to get it out there to you at 6 p.m. on the third Tuesday of every month, like we've been doing now for several years. My name is Adam White. I head up the government and legislative affairs efforts of the Alaska Airmen's Association, and it is time for another edition of Advocacy with Adam. So I've got a lot of things to cover. I've got my notes here on my phone to make sure that we get through all of this. First, let me start off by saying for all of those federal employees that are continuing to work, even though they are not getting paid, I appreciate your dedication and commitment to keeping our national airspace running. To those federal employees that were told to not to come into work, I'm working the best I can to do what we can do to try to get this government shutdown to end and get you back to work, and those that are continuing to work without pay, trying to get that back pay squared away as we continue to move forward. So with that topic, it doesn't appear there's any end in sight right now. Every time they go in to talk about these things, the vote never happens. There's other issues that come up, and here we sit. So speaking of things that are coming up for vote, we're going to talk about something that happened in Washington, D.C. today. And at the time that I'm recording this, we're still waiting to find out exactly what the outcome is, but I'm pretty sure I know how this is going to turn out. And a little bit of a teaser. We'll get to that in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and work through my list in order that I've got it here, so I'll make sure I don't forget anything. First of all, let me remind all of you, if you do have questions or if you've got any comments about what I'm talking about here, go ahead and type something in the description, below the description there in the comment section. I do my best to keep an eye on those, especially in the first few days of the time that I upload this, and then I go back and check periodically after that and try to answer those questions when they come up. So that is a good way to get in touch with me. So yeah, go ahead and type in your questions and things down below, and I'll be able to respond to you. So how many of you check NOTAMs? Be honest, how many times do you actually check NOTAMs before you get in the airplane and fly? I went flying yesterday. Actually, the thumbnail for this month's video is from my flight yesterday, crossing the Alaska Range from the interior down to the Kenai Peninsula. I checked NOTAMs before I took off. I did a full pre-flight briefing, and NOTAMs are still difficult to wade through, and it's I still laugh every time I think about it, but Chairman Sumwalt, former chairman of the NTSB, Chairman Sumwalt, said in a hearing one time that NOTAMs are a pile of garbage because you have to wade through so much information to find out anything that's pertinent to your flight. Another comment he made is, when is there not migratory birds in an area, birds around an airport? You know, he's kind of got a point. Anyway, so there's been a major update and shift and change in the NOTAM system. Actually, they're working towards transitioning to a cloud-based system to hold and store all of that information. You probably remember hearing in the news recently, in the past couple of years, of the NOTAM system failing and shutting down commercial air traffic. That's a problem. And it's a problem because they were using an outdated, antiquated system that, well, let's just say it wasn't even Windows 95, I don't think. Now they're switching to a cloud-based system to be able to go through and keep those NOTAMs robust and have a lot more resiliency. They're switching to that platform and that program. You as the end user probably shouldn't see any change, to be honest with you. If you're calling flight service, they're still going to give you those NOTAMs. Now, I will tell you that Alaska Flight Service is now responsible for a lot of that NOTAM system, which is an interesting thing, that Alaska would be in charge of so much of that for the system. The other part of it, if you use ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, or Leidos has their online web portal, if you use any of those, you probably shouldn't see much of a change or a notice, but there is a little bit of a possibility that there might be some hiccups. And so if there is, do me a favor, try to record as much as you can about what the mess up was or what was missing. Let flight service know, let them know first, but then let me know so I can kind of track this and kind of work it and make sure that we get this system working well. So keep an eye out on what's happening with the NOTAM system. Some other new things that are coming into play, we've got Mosaic. That's coming into play actually on the 22nd, which is tomorrow from the time that I'm recording this. There'll be some changes in the Sport Pilot privileges and requirements. And if you operate under Sport Pilot, you need to do your homework with that, because there's been some additional things that you can do because of those changes. A lot of folks are calling it Sport Pilot 2.0, and there's a lot of good things here that are happening. So when we look and see what's happening in July of next year, that's when the light sport aircraft certification updates and changes. And there's a lot of confusion with people about what is Sport Pilot and what is light sport. Just a reminder, Sport Pilot regulates the pilot's qualifications and privileges. When you start talking about light sport, we're talking about airplanes, and they've expanded the scope of what is included and the capabilities and privileges of a sport pilot. And there's been some updates into what a light sport aircraft is. But just because you can operate a certified airplane that is able to do that with a sport pilot privileges, kind of a tongue twister, say that fast 3 times, that aircraft doesn't necessarily have to be a light sport aircraft. And I say that because there's some certified aircraft up to some 182s even that, depending on their serial number range, would be considered sport pilot eligible, but it is not a light sport aircraft. So that's a little crazy there. So I encourage you to dig through and make sure you're aware of those rules and regulations if you operate under that sport pilot privilege. And so moving down the list, Title 17. That is, we've talked about that before. That is where the state of Alaska is looking to reduce bureaucracy, and state DOT has asked for some feedback and some comments on some things that they can do to help reduce bureaucracy. I filed some comments last week ahead of that deadline, and looking forward to DOT working through some of those things that I recommended and others have recommended as well. I anticipate that there might be some public outreach by DOT to work through some of those things and get more public feedback and input. So stay close and pay attention to what we may talk about at that point. Okay, so the Anchorage airspace redesign. I keep talking about this, and this is a big topic, but right now we're in the middle of a public comment period that actually ends on the 24th, and this is for the first phase of the FAA's public engagement. There is some information out there, and I'll put a link in the description so you can go and follow through and look at those things and offer some feedback to the FAA. There's been a lot of feedback already provided to the FAA, and I want to thank the FAA that even during this shutdown, they are still working this project, and they have already accommodated a lot of the comments and questions and suggestions that have been filed already. So they are being very proactive with updating that proposal with some of the things that have been brought forward. So again, look for the description here at the bottom of the page, and I'll be able to get you a link to where you can go and look at that proposal and where you can comment on it. Comments are due October 24th. This is not the end of this project. There will be several more opportunities for you to comment. So pay attention to the changes that have happened. And now here's where we run into a risk, because we keep talking about this. This is an ongoing project, and it won't be done until 2027. You may get inoculated, maybe a good word, to my pleas and my request for you to participate. Each phase of this is asking for more comments as we work through it. So when I talk about these things and you've already commented, you need to go back and look at it again, because there's been some things that have been updated as we go through this process all the way to final implementation in 2027. So moving forward, Part 108 comments. I filed those on behalf of the membership before the deadline, and I will include a link to where you can go and read my letter to the FAA on the Federal Register and see what we had to say there. One thing of interest, there was a joint statement that was issued by a lot of organizations, the Alaska Airmen Association included with that, where it was a statement of alignment. It was a statement dealing with Part 108, if you're not familiar, is the proposed rules to allow drones to operate beyond the visual line of sight. There's some concerns and questions that we have in the manned flight industry, to use those terms. And so there was a statement of alignment between organizations telling the FAA, we as a group all agree on these questions and these potential problems, and ask that the FAA address them specifically. The Alaska Airmen Association signed on to that document. I included it at the end of my comments that were filed in the Federal Register, and again, you can go and read those comments there in the link that I'll provide. One thing that's interesting, when you look at the organizations that signed on to that, they are all nationwide organizations except for us. We were the only regional or statewide organization that was included in that process and in that conversation. That doesn't mean that other groups would not have agreed with what we were saying, but it indicates that the Alaska Airmen Association is a pretty big player in these issues. So thank you again for your participation and your membership, because that's what allows me to be involved in this level of conversation and this involvement. So we're anticipating that the FAA is going to quickly work through those comments, because they do have a kind of a deadline imposed on them by President Trump, because this is a result of an executive order. They have to have something to show for this process by February of 2026. Now, with the shutdown, my guess is they're going to have a little bit of a grace period with that, but we're keeping a close eye on it. To sum up our biggest concerns is that right-of-way below 500 feet. And the way the proposal states and reads is that if you are not ADSB out and you operate below 500 feet, you do not have the right-of-way. Drones will have the right-of-way unless you are ADSB out. Now, I see that as a backdoor ADSB mandate, and I see that as a major concern, to completely rely on electronics to deconflict and to detect and avoid when it comes to right-of-way issues. And so I've talked about that in our comment letter, and I encourage you to go read that to see what our position is. So continuing with the government shutdown, again, thank you for all of those folks that are out there continuing to work without a paycheck. And our hearts go out to those that are sitting at home or doing other things and not allowed to go into work because of this shutdown. I will say that the folks I've been able to communicate with, morale is pretty low with the FAA employees. There is some rumors and concerns floating around, which happens every time we have a government shutdown. But if you read the press and the media, it's really kind of uncertain the way this is going to end. And there's talk of positions not being brought back after this shutdown. And what will that look like? And what positions are we talking about? And those things are kind of the conversations that are happening. And I'm doing my best to keep up with that and to offer our advice and input as to how we see that impacting the industry. I will tell you, along with that, I've been in communication with our congressional delegation on this topic and some others, and they are very well aware of the impact that this has on our state. One of the biggest conversations that I've had with our congressional delegation is about the Rotor Act, R-O-T-O-R, Rotor Act, that is in the Senate Commerce Committee, that even today is up for a vote. And just a quick summary of what that Rotor Act is and what it's for. This is where Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Cantwell from Washington State They are the co-chairs of that committee. Senator Cruz is Republican, Cantwell is a Democrat. They are in alignment and agreement with this act, and so what's probably going to happen, if it hasn't happened already by the time you see this, it'll go to a voice vote. There's not going to be much discussion about it because they've worked through all this, and that's got me a little concerned because there's some language in there that I'm very concerned about, and I've talked to our congressional delegation about. Senator Sullivan is on the Senate Commerce Committee, and I've talked to his staffers about this issue. I think the intent of the Rotor Act is good. It's noble. The essence of this is that if you are required to be ADS-B out, it has to be on. Well, we know that. That's what the rules state for us, right? Well, the military has been operating under a different set of rules for that, and Senator Cruz, because of the mid-air collision that happened in Washington, D.C., has been on a campaign to fix that problem. And so this is what came out of that. The Rotor Act would mandate that ADS-B will be used by the military for most cases except for sensitive missions. We obviously know and understand that the military doesn't need to tell the whole world where they are all the time. We understand that. But if they're just flying in in the normal airspace along with civilians, then they need to participate with the program as well. So it brings some clarity to some of those things. Now, where it starts to go beyond that is that Senator Cruz has proposed in this act that if you are required to be ADS-B out, you should be required to be ADS-B in. Now, that is not what is currently in the rules, but I'll tell you, I've struggled with this from the very beginning because I'm a little disappointed, just to be frank, that the FAA, during the capstone days here in Alaska 25 years ago, was a program to get information into the cockpit. Now, as a result of that, there was an ability for air traffic control to be able to have a better idea where aircraft were. And that capstone program, which is initially a way to get data into the cockpit, which is what ADS-B in is today, was kind of pushed off to the side because the FAA can't fund that. They can fund a surveillance program, and that's what ADS-B turned into. And just to kind of prove the point, it's run by the Surveillance Broadcast Services Department of the FAA. And so ADS-B primarily is a surveillance program. And again, I see the benefit of that. I understand the need for that, and that's what it should be based on the way the FAA funding structure is allowed to do. But in the end, we as pilots have been left out in the cold, and I use that pun intentionally when I talk about this, that ADS-B in was never mandated. And the FAA said, well, we'll let industry decide. We'll let industry decide what the format should be and how it's displayed and depicted and what hardware is used to do all this stuff. And on a certain level, I can appreciate and understand why the FAA did that. Now, I also understand what Senator Cruz is saying. It doesn't make logical sense for you to be required to be ADS-B out, but that you're not ADS-B in, especially from the traffic deconfliction components of ADS-B in. So that's the essence of what the Rotor Act is about, is mandating that if you're required to be ADS-B out, you would be required to be ADS-B in. There's some timelines to this. I think 2030 is the proposed deadline for this if it goes all the way through and passes the Senate. There is, however, something that brings me great concern. On page 27, I believe it is, of that Rotor Act, and you can go look at it yourself if you like. I'll put a link to the act here in the description. It says that it is mandating that the FAA, a particular committee, an advisory committee, explore expanding ADS-B requirements to Class Delta airspace. I'm going to let that sink in for just a second. So right now, Class Alpha, Class Bravo, Class Charlie airspace is all rule-mandated airspace. This act tasks this committee to explore and to discuss and look at the impacts of expanding ADS-B out requirements to Class Delta. I've got some concerns about that. That all hinge back to what I said in our Part 108 letter, back to the conversation I had face-to-face with FAA Administrator Bedford in August. Privacy is a major concern for us. Privacy with ADS-B data tying to an aircraft IN number, and I know there's methods and ways to go back and fix some of these things, but again, all of the work, all of the burden is on the aircraft owner and on the pilot, and it never should have been allowed to be public to begin with, and the FAA needs to fix the problem. The FAA needs to go through and by default hide my information, my name and my home address, your name, your home address on your aircraft registration. That needs to be hidden from the public. Joe Public doesn't need to know where I live. Joe Public doesn't need to know my name tied to an aircraft. That needs to be fixed. Just like DMV records for your automobile are hidden from the public. There are folks that have a legitimate need to access that data, and after they are vetted, they are given limited access to that data. The FAA can do the same thing, and they should do it proactively, and they should do it system-wide and address the major privacy concerns that we have with ADS-B data. So, cost is also an issue when it comes to ADS-B equipage. Some of the airframes that operate here in Alaska, it would be very difficult to install ADS-B out. Class Delta would totally change the airspace proposal for Anchorage if this were to go through. Let me be clear, that is not what's being talked about for the Anchorage airspace. That is a totally separate issue. The Anchorage airspace is being worked completely independent of the Rotor Act. But if the Rotor Act were to be passed, and if the proposal was being considered to expand ADS-B out requirements down to Class Delta airspace, that would totally change what happens in Anchorage. That would totally change what happens at any other Class Delta in the state, like Bethel, which there's been a big push from the commercial operators to make Part 93 airspace around Bethel to mandate ADS-B out. I've had conversations on that issue with a lot of folks for several years now. So these are the things I'm working. These are the things that are happening. These are the things that happen because it was one or two sentences included in an act that didn't seem to be related. But you got to read through this stuff. You got to find it. And I'll tell you that when I first read that and sent an email to several other contacts in the industry and to the congressional delegation, none of them had seen that line yet. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm some super guy reading through everything, but I do my homework. And I found that and read that and got it out there for everybody else to see. And on a certain level, I'm okay with having the conversation. A lot of people don't like even having the conversation. But if you don't talk about it and if you don't work through it, then you can't rationalize and work through what will happen, good, bad, or indifferent. So that ties back to the Alaska Airmen's Association being at the table for a lot of these conversations. There's a phrase that goes around out there that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So think about that. I do everything I can to make sure that the Alaska Airmen's Association is at the table, because a lot of things that are happening, a lot of things that are being discussed, General Aviation's kind of on the menu, to be honest with you. An ADS-B equipage mandate down below 500 feet or to get into Class Delta, these are the expansions that are being proposed and talked about and considered. And again, the value and the benefit of ADS-B out, undeniable. Incredible technology. It's got a few problems. It's got a few issues that we can address, that can be fixed. And this is what I'm pushing for and working for just about every day, to be honest with you. All right, we've run a little bit long this month, but I want to briefly talk about here at the end about the recovery efforts in the YK Delta with the remnants of Typhoon Halong and the devastation that's happened on the west coast of the state of Alaska. Complete communities obliterated. Folks being evacuated from their homes, and the uncertainty as to whether or not they're going to be able to return, and if they do return, what will they find when they get back, and where are they going to live this winter, and what's going to be the long-term implications for all this stuff. a lot of really big questions. But there's a lot of things that are right now, a lot of things that need to be done today. And there's a lot of good people that are working to fix a lot of these needs, and there's a lot of things that are being done. I will tell you that I've had several people reach out and ask, what can General Aviation do? Here's the thing. This is going to sound a little odd, but the YK Delta is very well equipped with airlift capability and capacity. We know there's no roads out there. I've had to explain this to a lot of people from the lower 48 who want to help. And they say, well, I know that the roads were just wiped out because what I've seen in the pictures. Well, okay, there were no roads to begin with. There was no roads connecting communities. It's barges and it's aircraft. That's how everything gets around. Thankfully, the air taxis and the operators in the Bethel area, they had very little aircraft damage. And so their capacity to be able to haul goods and services and people has not been diminished. And I want to say a special call out and thank you and kudos and congratulations and whatever else you want to put onto this to State DOT. They have done an incredible job of getting these airports open back up in an incredible short amount of time. It was less than 2 days that they had all the airports at least opened so that aircraft could come and go. There's a lot of ongoing repairs and some pretty major damage on some of these runways, but DOT was able to fix them to the point where they could still open them back up. It's incredible to think about what DOT did there. So to Statewide Aviation and all the folks involved with that, thank you for doing such a tremendous job of getting our aviation infrastructure opened back up and operational, because that is what is getting food, that is what is getting people in and out, that's what's getting the recovery effort going. So with that, people have asked, what can I do to help? Right now, the air taxis and the 135 operators in the Bethel area have the capacity, and they have the infrastructure already in place to do everything that's being asked of them right now. Will that be the case moving forward? Probably. Most likely it will be. What I am cautious of is that we don't need to get a bunch of other folks out there flying in a part of the state where they don't have much experience going into some of the worst weather operations of the year, and now we have other issues. So if you want to help, there's ways that you can do that monetarily. There's ways that you can do that being involved in some of the other specific recovery efforts. I will tell you that probably the best place that I've seen and everybody else is talking about as a clearinghouse for financial aid and contributions is to the Alaska Community Foundation. And I'll include a link below for that place where you can go and make monetary donations. The state of Alaska says that is the fastest, easiest, most efficient way to help right now. Now, in the days moving forward, I know that there's a lot of conversations with the Alaska Council of Village Presidents and other entities in the state to figure out, do we rebuild a specific community? Do we help get houses just leveled and settled back on a temporary foundation for the winter to get people back into their homes in some of these communities? What happens when and where and how? A lot of that is still being determined and decided. Now, we have sent out an email on a couple of issues for calls for help and calls for action when it comes to this recovery effort. I want to say thank you to everybody. We sent out an email last week asking for either some hangar space or some underutilized commercial space for stockpiling and sorting some of the materials that have been given for the folks who've been evacuated to Anchorage. And I'll tell you that within an hour of us sending out that email, that need had been fulfilled. That's pretty awesome. So thank you to all of you out there that acted on that call for help and call for action that we sent out last week. We will do the same thing if we know of another thing that we can be a part of and help and fix. I know a lot of folks are concerned about evacuating pets now at this point, and early on, we were more concerned about getting people. And so now things are kind of switching over to some other things and getting people out to basically survey some damage and figure out what can be done to help rebuild. So pay attention to the media. Be careful how you get involved. Again, the Alaska Community Foundation is probably the best place right now to send some monetary donations to be able to help with this recovery effort. So I've gone 10 minutes longer than normal, but there's been a lot of things to talk about this month. Again, thank you so much for your membership. Without your membership and your participation and adding your name to the literally thousands of others, it gives us the momentum. It gives us the inertia to get a lot of things accomplished and done. And again, I know that it's because of this membership that stands behind me that when I go and talk about these concerns and these issues and advocate on your behalf, we're taken seriously because people know that we represent General Aviation in Alaska. So thank you for your participation in that. If you're not a member, please consider joining. There's a lot of value and benefit to becoming a member, but there is also the value and benefit to help the industry and to make sure that we protect, promote, and preserve General Aviation in Alaska, which is the mission statement for the Alaska Airmen's Association. So with that, I'll say goodbye and pay attention to our emails that come out and other social media posts, and when it comes for calls for help for the recovery effort in the YK Delta and in Western Alaska. So with that, I'll say goodbye, and we'll talk to you next time.